So this is my lesson plan walkthrough for the briefing I'm going to be giving for fashion buying and product development. So just to put it in a bit more context, so it's the fashion buying and product development unit, which is delivered to our first years in term 2 and is worth 30 credits. It follows on nicely from their previous units in term 1, mapping the fashion buying process and trend forecasting. They will continue to map this process from concept to consumer, even looking at post-consumer, looking at it from the role and responsibility in this unit of a fashion buyer and or merchandiser for a brand or retailer of their choice. So the unit is split into 3 sections, part A, B and C. Again, just naturally mapping the process from concept to consumer. In part A, which is what the main focus of the briefing will be, they look at developing a trend forecast, which they've actually been set as a task over the winter break. Then they'll identify consumers for their chosen retailer before designing and planning a range. This part A will end in a formative assessment checkpoint where they'll get their work reviewed and get some feedback. They will then take one of their range plans and map that through the production process, coming up with quantities they'll buy for their retailer, selecting factories, everything like that. So basically everything to do with buying, but that won't be briefed on Tuesday. We'll look at that more when that comes up. Again, that area will end in a formative checkpoint before they finish the unit doing a group work activity where they'll be assigned part of the supply chain to investigate and advocate for ways that brands and retailers can be more sustainable and ethical in their production methods. And the outcome for that, they're given a bit of a choice, is either a podcast or a film lasting 5 minutes. So part A and B are individual written, visual and written reports. And obviously part C will be the podcast or film. So the main things, they get to upskill in Adobe Illustrator with layouts and looking at CAD flats, colouring in for their range plans. They'll experience a real factory visit, hopefully understand buyers' mass terminology and the production process in more detail, practice buying and merchandising activities that relate to real life scenarios, and finally investigate better and future fashion practice. So as you can see from my color-coded infographics, that translates into their timetable. So we've got the briefing that I'm giving that you're covering over here, which again will just be mainly focusing on the briefing for part A. I'll introduce part B and C to them, but very much of an overview, and then they'll be briefed those at later dates. So it's just part A that we'll be looking at on Tuesday. So now if I go to the brief, which I'll send you to, obviously this is just the brief. It's in a lot more detail, the Word documents, all the deadlines, goes through everything. Again, it's split up into parts A, B and C. Do have a read through it in more detail if you wish. Part A is obviously what I'll be briefing in more detail and then just giving a very quick overview of what they'll be doing in part B and C. So take a look at that if you like. Finally, I've included the actual lesson plan for the day. So the bigger picture is obviously that it's a briefing for their new unit. So essentially it's their very first lesson. And it follows on from those previous units they've done in term 1. So it gives a good overview before commencing their first lesson on the Thursday following that. So Flip Learning, they've been asked to do that point part A1, which is a small trend forecast for the retailer that they've chosen to study on this unit. They've just come off forecasting, so they're quite savvy in that. They really enjoy it. The pennies dropped about what it's all about. So they usually come back with really nice outputs of that. And it just takes a bit of pressure about doing that really quickly in the first week. So instead, they've had a little bit of time to collect images and really make that visually interesting. And so it works well as a Christmas break project. So essentially, that's the Flip Learning. So the overall point of the briefing is to basically give them an overview of the unit, focusing mainly on part A, and to make sure they kind of understand what they're going to be doing throughout the unit, the key dates for formative and summative, and understand the new skills and threshold concepts they should be confident in at the end. So what differences? I'm revisiting that poster like I've just presented to you. I presented that to them before the Christmas winter break, sort of putting in context what they'll be doing this term, and then briefing that trend forecasting project, which I asked them to do. As well as the written Word document brief, I'm also doing the briefing in a more visual PowerPoint, which will be delivered on the day of the briefing that you're observing me on, which just sort of breaks it down more step by step with lots of work examples and visual examples. So hopefully that'll be better for those learners that learn more visually. At the same time, this is a remote lesson on Zoom, so it gives them the opportunity to record it. And also, once I record it and edit it later on, I can generate subtitles for any students that want to look back at it on a later date. It should be easy for them to follow. And again, just for any of those students that find a briefing overwhelming, it just gives them that opportunity to revisit it and rewatch it later on. So I'm hoping that the students be reassured of what's expected of them and what's going to be happening over the course of the unit, and understand the key skills they should hopefully be achieving throughout or by the end of the unit. So after the briefing, I've got a very quick lessons learned thing from last term that I'll be delivering. Then we'll be putting the students into smaller seminar groups where initially they'll be talking to each other and providing feedback on the trends that they've created over the winter break. Myself and Mandy will be going around seeing each of those groups and giving feedback on their trends, but at the same time offering reassurance on the briefing, how we'll be going through it all step by step, and answering any initial questions. So assessment for learning, obviously during those seminar groups, we'll be checking any initial questions and just essentially offering reassurance on the briefing and making sure they all feel like they can come back on Thursday and don't feel totally overwhelmed. At the end of that day too, so in the afternoon after we've got another little activity, we'll be getting students to go off, and on the Wednesday between the briefing day and their next lesson, we'll be asking them to read through their briefs in more detail and again come up with any initial questions once they've had a bit more time to digest it. So there'll be two opportunities again. So we'll be setting up a dedicated Aula feed where they can ask questions for those that feel a bit less confident in asking in front of a larger group. Again, we will also be starting the Thursday session with a Q&A session for anybody that has any more questions too, and probably answering any questions that we're noticing are coming up from a lot of people on that Aula feed. Materials and equipment, obviously internet connection, sending out Zoom invites, show students where the briefs, timetables and so on are located on Aula. Possible challenges, there could be a little bit of a delay, perhaps I'm preempting in starting the class, purely because students haven't been on Zoom over the winter break, so for about a month now, and it sometimes prompts you to do updates. So anybody who might be logging in close to 9 AM, there could be a 5-10 minute delay, but nothing major. And yet learning activities after the class, basically just taking the time to read through that brief and having the confidence to ask questions either on that Aula feed post or in the next class. So hopefully that all makes sense and gives you a kind of overview of where the lesson's going, very obviously just like kind of a briefing really in general. So I hope that helps, and let me know if you've got any questions. Thank you.